Welcome to Scale Her Up, the show for female business owners and leaders who want to grow profitable, sustainable businesses without burning out. I'm Dr. Brenda Hector. I'm a business growth specialist helping women develop themselves and their businesses so they can achieve their goals and enjoy the lifestyle they dream of. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring stories, honest conversations, and practical strategies to help you start, grow, or scale your business. If you're new here, hit follow so you don't miss an episode, and come and join our Scale Her Up Facebook community to keep the conversation going. And the conversation today, I'm delighted I've got Diana Muriel with me of Diana Muriel Direct Communications. And currently, I didn't write down the job title, Diana, sorry. You're in communications at Serica Energy, aren't you?
That's right. Communications manager at Zurich Energy. And Diana Muriel Direct Communications came about when I did my logo, which was just DMDC. And in my head, that was dianamuriel.com because that's my email address. But my designers said, oh, you can't do that. You've got to do something more than that. How about direct communication? So that's really why it's called Diana Muriel Direct Communications.
But you are all about communication.
Yes.
So let's go back to when you started your own business. What was the decision-making process there? Why did you feel that you had to start your own business?
Okay, it's a curious story. So I was a war correspondent for CNN International, and I was based in London, and I was going to very unpleasant places most of the time. And I had, thankfully, bought myself a retreat in Scotland, a derelict farmhouse, which I found a wonderful builder, and he turned it into a house. And then I was sent to the Iraq War, and then I met Peter, who was a soldier in the British Army. Peter and I fell in love. And when I got back to the UK and he got back to the UK, we decided we would start a family. So when our son was born in London, Peter was still in the army and I was still at CNN. And I came straight up to Scotland with my little baby. And I spent a year thinking about what I was going to do. And it became apparent to me as a 40-year-old first-time mother that there was absolutely no way I was going to go back to my next assignment, which was in the Baghdad bureau of CNN. So Peter and I had a discussion and we decided to set up our own company. And it was a very strange company because Peter is a Royal Engineer. So his background as a very practical man, he had all sorts of trades that he can do. And he was leaving the army after 22 years of service. So we called this business Home Improvement and Maintenance Limited. And I was the maintenance and he was the home improvements. And so it was a very curious company that did building work and did communications consultancy. This couldn't last. We had to change it. And eventually,
pick your lane, as they say. Yeah,
I picked my lane. And so it became DMDC, dianamuriel.com or Diana Muriel Direct Communication. And so there I was in Scotland and I had this background in television and I was casting around for things to do. And I got involved with some agencies that do media training for oil and gas companies. I didn't even know this was a thing. So I was invited to go to a day at Shell where they were running an exercise about what would happen, what would they do, and what would they say if there was an oil spill. And they just had one. It was the Gannet oil spill. And it had been relatively serious. And they didn't feel they'd acquitted themselves particularly well, and they wanted to improve that. So they held this media training day for their staff, and they invited agencies to come and support them with that. And I was invited to come along and simply ask questions as you would do as a journalist at a press conference. And after this session, I was contacted by LinkedIn by the head of comms at Serica, at Shell in Aberdeen. And he asked me if I was interested in coming to work for them because they had liked the line of questioning that I had adopted in this phony press conference. And of course I said yes. And this was my first introduction really to the world of corporate comms. And it was fascinating coming in from the outside because as a working journalist, I had no idea of the angst that companies went through in creating messaging boards and trying to stay on message and thinking deeply about what they would say to a journalist. For me, it was just a very simple, straightforward approach of asking very simple questions and then sense checking the answer. So I learned a lot and I had a wonderful title at Shell. I was the issues manager, which I thought was a fabulous title, which I thought of myself as the agony aunt of Shell. And I would go around and stick my nose in all sorts of other people's business to do with all the assets that the company owned and ask them where were the skeletons buried and what what would they say if the skeletons fell out of the cupboards? And this was my job. And it was fascinating meeting very clever people, sensible, ordinary, decent human beings working in the oil and gas industry and wanting to explain the challenges and the issues that they face as they produce hydrocarbons from the North Sea. A very challenging place to do that. So I learned a lot, and that was my first introduction to the world of corporate comms and being a consultant, and hence the development of this company eventually into DMDC.
I want to ask about these people, these intelligent, capable people who are working in a very, I'm in Aberdeen too. It's a familiar industry to us in Aberdeen. But yeah, so very capable, great people. Were they scared of the media?
Yes. And this is what I did not understand. Because as I explained to them, the media are just like you. They want to go home to their families at the end of the day. They just want to get some answers to their questions. And they're the questions that anybody on the street, that's the point of the media, but they are the representation of Joe Public. And they have straightforward questions, not trying to trip you up or trick you. And telling the truth is what you need to do. Now, you need to tell the truth in a way that is understandable and digestible and doesn't scare people. But you have to tell the truth. And if you don't tell the truth, you are going to trip yourself up. Your colleagues will say different things. There will be different interpretations. This is problematic, ultimately. And people who work in oil and gas companies, they have children. They want to secure the planet for their grandchildren. They don't want to destroy the world. And this was at the very beginning of the ESG story and people thinking more about the environment and social and governance and trying to get those stories straight. And a great deal of work has been done in the last 20 years since we started this here in Aberdeen to tell those stories and to improve those statistics around emissions and emissions control. It was a very interesting time, yes.
I'm sure it was. Yeah. We could dig deep and talk about that all day, but that's probably for another podcast that talks about the oil and gas industry. I'm thinking about you starting your own business. What transferable skills come from being a war correspondent to being a business owner?
A couple of things. The first one is that war correspondents and frontline journalists, whether they're doing business news reporting or anything else, you arrive somewhere, and particularly if you've been sent by the London Bureau to another country in another city, and you have to be an instant expert. And that's very difficult to do and actually very dangerous to do. So what you need to do is you need to be clear about what you know and what you haven't seen and don't know. And you need to work very quickly with your production team to understand what they know and get that information and understand that those sources that they've got that information from are valid. And so you have to take each story and you have to understand how you would approach this if you were trying to, and the person I always had in my mind was my mother. So my mother was an intelligent, educated woman who didn't know anything about the collapse of the Turkish economy. And I was there in Istanbul reporting on it. So what would I need to tell my mother? What had happened, why it had happened, when it had happened, who was involved in it, and what might happen next. And that was basically how you break it down. They're working in communications consultancy and dealing as first of all, as an issues manager at Shell, was the same question. How did this happen? When did it happen? Who is involved? And what are you going to do about it? You're in this situation now, but how are you going to improve it? And similarly, when you meet a new client and go into their business, you have to read the room very quickly. And as I became more experienced in how oil and gas companies are organized, and they're organized along very similar lines, different departments, so HSE, engineering, maintenance, etc. You learn who to go to ask questions of. And as long as you are thoughtful and humble about your ignorance and gentle about your approach, because they don't owe you anything, they're doing you a favor. And what I discovered was that the people who really understood things, technical engineers, were able to explain things very simply because they understood it completely. Whereas people who didn't really understand things made them terribly complicated and used lots of big words and spoke in corporatese. And they didn't actually really know what they were talking about. So that's how I have applied some skills. Quick ability to read the room and trusting in what you actually know and who your sources are and are they reliable sources.
It's really interesting that the people that know it can explain it well, but yeah, the people that
Really simply. So an intelligent 16-year-old or my mum could understand it because they totally get it. And so any question you have, they can answer. Whereas others perhaps not so much.
So does that therefore mean that those that talk something up quite complicatedly maybe don't quite understand it as well as they're trying to put across?
I would suggest so. And I watched management consultants do exactly this. They would go into oil and gas companies, particularly at moments of transformational change. And these people are very intelligent, highly educated, ambitious people. And they were there to, for the most part, in my experience, support transformation change projects. As the industry goes through its cycles and gets bigger and smaller and expands and contracts, there's been lots and lots of these rounds over the last 20 years. And what they do is exactly this. They go and they interview people inside the company and then they reflect back exactly what those individuals learned, but just beautifully produced in a lovely slide pack. But I'm very cynical about how much additional value they add. But from that, they will offer their opinion as to what the company might do in terms of its direction, etc. But that is what they're doing. And so inside, as an internal comms person, inside an oil and gas company, you actually have enormous access to all sorts of information. And what engineers is someone who can help them with the storytelling. These people are doing extraordinary things. They are building extraordinary facilities. They're maintaining extraordinary facilities. They're decommissioning extraordinary facilities that were never meant to be decommissioned. They were never designed to be decommissioned, many of them. And I'm thinking particularly of working at Shell with the Brent fields and the Brent Delta with its concrete legs, which was never supposed to be taken away. So what they've had to overcome is amazing. But many of them are not good storytellers. They're so into it and so deep in the weeds of it, they can't step back and recognize and celebrate the jeopardy, the danger, the skill, the sheer skill that it takes to work out how you're going to lift incredibly heavy topsides off a jacket, off the legs of the platform, and safely return back to shore for decommissioning. So my role was very much to help tell these stories and encourage people to tell theirs. And that's something that I really enjoy. And I didn't have to go to work with my blood group written on my chest, as I did when I was a war correspondent.
Yes. Goodness. Yes. So I was thinking about how, yeah, you're not having to put your life at risk by.
I got on at absolutely the right time, Brenda. I'd been in it for a long time, and it's dangerous and it's tiring. And there have been very exciting moments. It's never as glamorous as people think it is. It just isn't glamorous. And people that I worked with were being killed and maimed. And they were either inside my organization at CNN, or they were my bodyguards, or my fixers and producers, local fixers and producers, drivers. Iraq was incredibly dangerous, and Afghanistan was just as dangerous. And there comes a point where you make a decision about whether or not you can continue to do this. And having waited a very long time to become a mother, I knew that I could not go back to that after I had Jane.
And becoming a parent changes your perspective on life, absolutely, doesn't it? Even if you don't have a job like that you were doing. Yeah.
Yes. And I'd never really worked in a job that was 9 to 5. This was a relatively new experience to me. And the oil and gas industry looks after its people very well. And it's a highly paid industry. And I wasn't working offshore all the time, which is very demanding and challenging. But I had the opportunity to do that. And that very much appealed to me, if you like, the journalist in me who wants to go off and see it for myself firsthand. So it was a lovely transition for me.
So what about running your own business then? What did you learn about? You've probably learned a lot about yourself in the role before, but I guess there might be, if you can go and do that kind of thing, if you can be in war zones and whatever, then running your own business should be a doddle, shouldn't it?
No, it's not.
Well, I know it's not. Yes.
There's no dealing with clients in the format. And so I did learn some things. I learned that I didn't want to hire lots of people because managing people is exhausting and expensive. I learned that there are some very excellent technical people here, graphic designers, cameramen, editors. And I was fortunate enough to do some work at STV. So I actually met some of these. They were very good. And so I had highly skilled people around me that I could call on to do the work I needed to do, and very much enjoyed working with them. But I learned that you have to handle clients very carefully. And because I was a senior correspondent at CNN and I ran bureaus that I was in, I was used to making decisions. And actually, some of the decisions are not mine to make, they are for the client to make. And so I did learn that the hard way a few times with some clients who had their own views on what good looked like, which I didn't share. That was important for me to understand and to accommodate. And on one occasion, I couldn't accommodate it. So that was the end of that relationship, but that was fine. So that's what you learn. Not everybody will share your opinion. And some of the things I was doing was doing media training with people. That's quite personal. That is quite a personal thing to do because the way you talk, it divulges how you think and what kind of person you are. It's very revealing. And you need to be thoughtful about what that means because you cannot hide it. You really can't hide it, at least not for any sustained period of time. And so many people, when they are presenting and when they're presenting on film, their mind, the frontal cortex, is full of, do I look all right? Is my hair okay? I've got a cold. I want to sneeze, whatever. And so they're not actually in the moment where they're trying to communicate genuinely, authentically. Their minds are getting fried by all this other information that they're thinking about. Or they are overwhelmed with fright. People, when you turn the microphone on and you switch the camera on, that red light goes on, it's amazing how people change. And some people are very receptive to all the things that we ask them to do, which is to control their breathing and to speak more slowly, because that does two things. One, it gives you time to think about what's coming next. And two, you just sound more authoritative and it's easier for the person listening to you to take in what you're saying. Because
I'll give you a third one there. It also calms the nervous system, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Because we all gabble away in normal conversation, but actually when you're trying to impart information and land messaging, then you have to do this in a slightly different way. And it's quite personal to take someone and do that. I find that fascinating. I think it's a great skill. And as I point out to lots of people I work with, there is absolutely no difference between a senior engineer in the organization and a CEO who has come through the ranks of engineering to become the CEO. The only difference is that the CEO is probably a better communicator. So he's got all the same degrees as you have, and he's got relatively the same experience. He might have been a geologist or a reservoir engineer or who knows what, integrity engineer, but he's got the same background. It's just he or she is really good at communicating, at explaining. And they might also have done an MBA and understand the world of finance more acutely than perhaps you do. But, that it's really about communication. That's what sets the leaders apart, people who are good at communicating, which is quite interesting because people spend an awful lot of time in technical industries working very hard on becoming expert. And they are so deeply in the weeds, engineering weeds, that they can't tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really knows what they're talking about. Or, and this is another route that some people take, is they listen too much to the management consultant who speak a whole language of their own about alignment. And so they get lost in that, I call it corporatese, which doesn't make any sense to most people. And use very big words to say very simple things. It's about stripping down the language, saying what you really mean and believing it, as you said, because it's true and it's true, and keeping it simple.
So that's in big organizations, in oil companies and things. My audience are people like you and me. Okay, so they're business owners, and I think it's a big step sometimes for someone who's started their own business to actually get out there and communicate, come on a podcast, do some videos on social media, go networking and talk about themselves and their business. What would be your advice for a business owner to how they can improve their communication with the outside world? Because a lot of business owners don't realize that they're going to have to go and sell. So
Yeah.
communication is really important in sales.
Well, my advice is to just start. And if you have a teenager in your house, take advantage of it, because those people really know how to make short form videos work. And they have two children, and they are my fiercest critics. And I
Oh,
love
yeah.
that work. But it's true. And you just have to have the courage, particularly, look, I'm 61, so I am not of the generation, the TikTok generation. So I will take advice and learning from my teenagers, and my son is 21, and I will take on board what they advise me to do. And you just need to start. You just need to try. You need to get out there. You need to network. You need to find the courage in you to go up and talk to complete strangers at networking events. And most people will be very polite and very open, and they're just as nervous as you are. And you can always find a way to start that conversation and make that introduction. And most people are kind and well-meaning and are interested. And you never know what those connections might lead to. So just do it. It's hard. And I have a good friend of mine who runs a communication agency in Aberdeen, and she's a complete introvert, but you wouldn't believe it if you looked at her social media feed, because she is forever doing small videos and talking about her various successes. And this has really helped her agency enormously. And she should be immensely proud, because this does not come naturally to her. So you just have to take a deep breath and do it.
Great advice. Great advice, actually. And yet you focus there on the why you have to do it. Well, so it's not just for the sake of it. It's because to get you out there.
Yes, you have your network. Everyone has a network, but you need to expand that network, and that is hard. And I have to say that most of the work that I have received is from the network of people that I have worked with. So they've seen me in action, and I have helped them in the past, and it's just come around again. There have been one or two which are completely new, and those have been great. But for the most part, it is a network, and that's a 20-year strong network. And Brenda, it has not been easy. I had spells in 24 where there was almost no work at all. It was really tough. And it was interesting because that was just the beginning of this tax change that's happened to the oil and gas industry, where the energy price levy was put in place, and companies were finding that they were having to pay very large tax bills to the Treasury. And that put a brake on all sorts of activity. And one of the first things to go is comms, because you just stop talking, especially when there's bad news. Actually, one of the times when you need to do talking, particularly inside your own company, that is what naturally happened. And so it got very quiet. And that meant it got very quiet for my business. And it was very hard. This has not all been smooth. And it is one of the reasons why I am now working full time for an oil and gas company, Surrogate Energy, because it is very difficult out there on your own. And if I was 20 years younger, I would probably have kept going, because I would have been able to develop it. But at my age and stage, I'm not sure that is something I wanted to do. And I looked everywhere. I went to Saudi Arabia. I went to Abu Dhabi. I went to Dubai. I'm very glad I didn't end up there in any of these
Yes,
places.
at the moment, definitely. Yeah.
Things have been, actually, I think it would have been very
Back in a war zone, wouldn't you? Yeah.
but unable to report it. And as you see, people who live then are unable to report it. That would not have suited me at all. So not a compromise I would think I would be capable. But it's very interesting times. But I went to explore all of those markets. But no, I'm very glad where things have turned out the way they have. But I wouldn't suggest I'm the poster girl for running your own communications consultancy. I didn't hire people. I used very specific trades and specialists to help me. And I stayed in my lane, which was energy, oil and gas, mostly, but also a bit of renewable energy. It's difficult. It's really difficult.
And so you've had to make a decision then to go and take an employed role. It's something we don't talk about, actually, like the exit. What does the exit look like and some people are forced into an exit from their business. Some people their goal is a particular type of exit and maybe they achieve it or not. Did your exit was driven by the market? Yeah.
So my exits, the company still exists.
Yeah.
And not sorry, is when
Yeah.
you see Brenda, you get lots of letters from people that you don't know saying, because they've got access to companies' hands, and they write to you and they say, "We're very interested in buying your business. Are you thinking of selling out?" And I'm thinking, you clearly know absolutely nothing about my business. But so the company will still sit there. And I think that the beauty of core, as I discovered it as a mother, is that you can do it anywhere you like. You can do it part-time, you can do it at weekends, you can do different types of calls, you can work for lots of different clients and set your own parameters. And so it's super flexible. So no, having had periods of where I've not been working or not regularly working, but I hate that. I do not see any prospect of retiring. I do not want to retire. I want to just keep going, but doing not at the same pace that we work at today, just to keep going. So I think I will always have this consultancy business and I will always do things with it in the future. Though it's not ending, and I'm certainly not selling it to anybody. There's nothing really to sell. It's it's important to me to have this company and to have the ability to keep working and to keep working through it. And I know how flexible it is, which I love.
So the role that you're doing then, they weren't willing to take on an
Mhm.
external consultant.
No, I think I can't remember. I think I was no, it was advertised as an intern as a full-time staff role, and I was absolutely happy with that. And they are an excellent company to work for. It's like having worked in the industry in oil and gas for 20 years in Aberdeen. It's like where everybody good ended up. Everybody that I loved working with has arrived at Serica Energy team. But no, it's a good place to work. It's an incredibly forward-thinking company. It is very busy, it's exciting, it's buying companies, it's expanding. And that in an industry which is thought of to be being in decline and failing, it is not failing. And so that is very exciting to be part of that. And there's more to come. And the senior team, collegiate and collaborative and helpful. And there are no big egos. So it is really a breath of fresh air and wonderful to work with, actually. So I'm very happy and having a great time. And over time, more and more of my skills will come into play and it will get even better. But it's something that I don't know. There's the legislation on ageism is improving. So people are working later. And I absolutely want to do that. It's something that gives me joy and gives me a sense of purpose. And many of us are defined by what we do and who we are professionally. And I really noticed that after I stopped working for CNN and before my consultancy business really took off. And people would ask me what I did. And I remember saying, "Oh, I'm a mum." And then they would look away in boredom and disgust. I'm thinking, that's actually very hurtful. I'm very proud of being a mother, particularly at my age, but it's not enough. And I realized that even for me, ultimately, it wasn't enough, which is very interesting.
But it's a perspective, isn't it? Because really you were coaching and developing the future workforce.
I described myself as a family manager. And then they said, "Oh, what's that?" So I'm a mother.
Actually, it's the most important role there, isn't it? Because like
Yes,
in business and in industry, like if we as mothers are developing great people, that's the future, isn't it? So
absolutely.
yeah.
And it depends on those early years, Brenda. And I was fortunate and I was paid very well by CNN. I had a lovely flat in London, which I saw. So, I had money and I was able to spend those early years with the children, dabbling in work. I was really there for the children. And I know the difference that has made in their lives and the quality of our relationship as a consequence of that. And it is a scandal that women and men cannot spend that time with their young children when they are very young, because it is so unbelievably important for the children and for themselves as well. And the American system where you go straight back to work after 3 weeks or something, I just do not understand. It's actually cruel. And there needs to be, and this is why I think that women entrepreneurs is actually very important, because being an entrepreneur gives you flexibility, particularly if you've established that well before you become a mother. And then you can take that time and you can work your own hours and you can decide how you want to play it. And your children will benefit from that and you will benefit from that because it takes enormous skill, actually, as a young mum, especially if you've got more than one, is incredibly demanding and very tiring. And you actually need that time. And it's beautiful and it's normal and it's how we should be as human beings. We are not machines. We are not robots. And it's cruel to separate children from their mothers and their fathers, I think. And as a society, we need to think very carefully about what we're doing now. We look to Scandinavia, we see completely different models. And I think we need to learn from that because all of society will be better. But I think women in particular running their own kitchen table businesses, I think it's a really good idea. Watch women of my age who have not done that. They married in their late 20s or 30s, and they married very wealthy men, and they had a lovely life, and they stopped working, and they had horses and children and whatever, tennis matches and boarding schools and God knows. And they're clever women. Some of them were, for example, some of the first women to go into HSBC as international bankers. So very clever women. They cannot get a job. They have not kept a pulse going through their CV, and they cannot get a job. They will not even be looked at because they've had 20 odd years standing outside the world of work. And that's wrong.
It's like I asked you about the skills that the transferable skills from being a war correspondent to being in business. It's like the world's forgotten that a family manager is juggling a lot, is running events and managing a budget. And the skills that come from that don't have to be something that's on your CV that actually is transferable into another role.
But the other thing that's really important is the perspective that women have, the framing, the language they use.
But we've been told, just a mum. We've been told that being a mum is just a mum, and that's not.
Then you look at some of the behaviour of some people in these big companies and think these are a bunch of children. So actually, but more seriously, women think about the world in a different way, and their framing is incredibly important because it stops a lot of aggressive alpha male behavior, which is nothing but destructive. And there is not sufficient mass of women in the workforce to change this the way it should be changed in the United Kingdom. You see this in Norway, where they've legislated for women to be on boards and to be senior executives in their company. And there have been vast changes that have taken place there because women don't think in the same way. They don't compete in the same way. Their thinking is just very different. And I don't like to gender this, but it's true, actually. I've noticed this with all my years of working. I'll give you a little story. One of the ways that CNN would use female correspondents was they would have us do personal stories. They like to go send us to horrible places and then go and talk to street children, maternity hospitals or whatever. And I did all of that, and it's fine. But what I noticed was that because I was a woman, it didn't matter if I wasn't able directly to speak or whether I was using an interpreter. Because I was a woman, people would open up to me in a way that they wouldn't to a male correspondent. And I think some of the best pieces I did at DN were some of these, we would call them social pieces, where you would get the background to why there were these street urchins in Kabul. Or I went and did a piece on, for example, which only a woman could do, but there was a European Union funding for the reopening of the hammams in Kabul. The hammams were the wash houses where people would go and bathe because they didn't have bathrooms in their own homes. And one day a week, the women were allowed to go to the hammam. No men were, and this is where the women were. And the Taliban shut it down because this is where the women networked and decided whose son was going to marry whose daughter. And they shared all their tales of woe, and they schemed and they planned and they made all that was their joy. And I went to do this story with a female camerawoman, a freelance camerawoman from Yorkshire, who was phenomenal girl. And I'm afraid, again, one of the casualties of war subsequently. And Beth and I went and filmed this, and they were all in the bath, and there had been a wedding. So many of the women had henna on their hands, and they were going here to scrub it off. Everybody was here, had been at the wedding. There was all this chatter and gossip about the wedding. Now, Beth spoke Pashtun, so she was incredibly useful. And I was standing there in this kind of changing area, and it's all quite steamy. And Beth and I looked at each other and went, okay. And we just took our clothes off. And they have their headphones on. And it was just brilliant. They were picking up our underwear, looking at our Marks and Spencer's bras to understand how they were constructed because they hadn't seen anything like. And then the conversation really got going, and they told me all about how the Taliban had shut it down and how they had suffered so much as a consequence, and how they had not been able to see their friends and their children hadn't known each other, and wonderful stories emerged from this, which you can only do as a woman. But what struck me about these Afghan women was they were so beautiful and they were so fierce. They were survivors. And there was one woman in particular who struck Brenda, and she stood there and she stood up and she had beautiful long hair that had been hennaed, so it was red. And she said, "Film me." And she was stark naked. She said, "Film me and show the world what an Afghan woman looks like." She was brilliant. We told them all we are going to film are your hands and your feet. We are not going to film your faces, and we're certainly not going to film your bodies. And that is how we did it. But because we were in the same compromised position, they trusted us. So what am I saying from that? I'm saying that sometimes in order to get people's trust, you have to display your own vulnerability. And only women are able to tell some of these stories. And actually, I got a prize for that story because it was such a powerful piece of film, and it was all the women talking. I barely had to do anything, and Beth was absolutely brilliant. Although trying to keep the camera lens unsteamed was very challenging. But so it was a great piece. So that's what I'm sort of talking about. Women think differently, they behave differently. Women bond with women in a way which men don't, and we do it very quickly, particularly older women, because we've been through so much. And I think all of that experience is valuable, and we're not using it properly in the world of business.
I totally agree. That's why I'm here. And I'm almost speechless. Thank you for sharing that amazing story, which is just what we're about. And I'm having a lunch for previous guests on the show the next week. And the tagline is, because women supporting women will change the world.
That's right. Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, had a fantastic saying. She said, "There is a special place in hell for women who do not help other women." And she was so right.
Yes. Yes. Diana, I could talk to you all day, but we're running out of time.
No.
So yeah, it's been just amazing. If we just finish, if there was one piece of advice that you'd give to another woman looking at starting her own business, what would it be?
It would be, believe in yourself. Believe that you can do this. Think carefully and slowly, and don't overlook the small stuff. You must stay in control of your money. You must stay in control of your cash flow, but you must believe that you can do this, whatever it is you're trying to build or sell. You can do it.
Believe. Absolutely. Thank you. Diana, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, I've really enjoyed it.
So much for coming on. Yeah, I can't wait to hear what people think of this episode.
Wonderful.
So, only 1 in 3 UK entrepreneurs are female, and men are 5 times more likely to scale past £1 million in turnover than women. It says if, but I've changed it to when we match them, we'll add £250 billion to the UK economy and create millions of jobs. And that's why Scale Her Up exists, to change those numbers one business at a time. Thanks for listening today. If this episode helped you, please follow the show, leave a review, and share it with another female business owner who needs to hear it. Join our Scale Her Up Facebook community and connect with me, Brenda Hector, on social media. I love hearing which episodes resonate with you. I can't wait to hear what you thought of Diana's episode. And the message, you're capable of more than you think. Keep going, and we're scaling up together.